Focus Nest podcast. Our ninth guest for this season, 2021, is Andrew Kim, PhD, pastor at Global Harvest Church. Are you a pastor there? And
Yes.
also, are you an adjunct professor at a seminary?
Yes, Southwestern Baptist Theological
Southwestern
Seminary.
Baptist, and right now in Dallas. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So welcome, Andrew Kim.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, thank you for agreeing to do this. So how old are you, first of all? You seem pretty young.
37 years old.
Oh, you're not that young. Oh, you're a lot older than I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have two boys that age me. I used to look younger, actually. So
like Zachary and Levi, you have two boys.
Yes.
How old are
boys.
they?
7 and 5 years old.
Oh, wow. First of all, I want us, the listeners and the viewers, to see that Andrew Kim has a YouTube channel called Theology 101. And like real bite-sized morsel, 7-minute long to maybe 8 minutes of very common questions that may circulate among church people, and these get tossed around, and you just dedicate the time to answer them in the most coherent and simple way possible. And I thought that was ingenious. What inspired you to do that anyway, first of all?
So I guess what led up to making the YouTube channel is that as a pastor, and then also when I teach seminary courses, I just noticed that people have similar issues or questions or things that were a little difficult for them to understand. And the feedback that I would get from my lectures and my sermons is that I'm able to simplify it in a way people can understand it. Honestly, one of the biggest factor of why I create this YouTube channel is because I taught an intensive course in Kazakhstan for a week with all the local pastors there.
Wow.
And when I started to go through all these different resources I recommend, is that, oh, you should read this or look at this commentary. One of them stopped me and said, well, first of all, none of these things are translated in our language. And also, so I said, okay, well, maybe you can look into the internet. There are a lot of resources that are pretty free you can find. And they said, well, even that, some of that is restricted in our area. And so one of the students asked me, can we just record your lecture so that we can study again later? And one another student came up and said, oh, what do you think about this person on YouTube? And he showed me this YouTube channel. It was really bad. It wasn't good. But I realized that people are looking for information, especially in theology, but there's not a lot of good theological information out there, or there's nothing that's curated for people who are in ministry and want to do ministry. And so this was 2-3 years ago when I went to Kazakhstan, but it just in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, man, I wish there's a way, some kind of resource for, people outside of America, people who aren't as privileged as we are to have, primary sources or, access to all these sources that we take for granted, where it can just be lectures or teaching things that people can really be trained with without having the access to these sources so that they can be better equipped for ministry. And so that's what I started thinking about. And that's why I created the channel, partly because I was thinking about people like them. Wow. I was also thinking about people like my mom or mother-in-law. Every time I meet with them, they'll tell me about some YouTube video, some conspiracy theory they read or they watch. And I'm just like, where are you getting this information? They keep saying YouTube. I was like, no, don't watch that channel. But so they'll ask me then which channels should I watch? Like, what are the good ones? And that was a good question. And so that's where I start to see that I felt like there wasn't many channels out there. Like the channels that I found out were either really long with super long lectures, or some are just sermons. But there wasn't many that was just easier to understand, a little more bite-sized, and something where it doesn't require a person to dedicate so much time, but then they can also get a good grasp of theology. One of the goals of the channel is that I want to present the diversity of views within Christianity that are orthodox, to show that, hey, just because you don't agree with this fellow Christian on this issue, this is not a heretical issue. There's a reason why you got to understand both perspectives, by the way, because they also have good arguments you might not have considered. Sure. And so that was really the motivation, is just to help lay people, to help maybe pastors or people training in ministry that don't have access to the resources we have in America. And it's really to do so because I know a lot of people I interacted with, even in seminary, have a hard time because seminary is so expensive and it takes up so much time. And so I'm almost trying to make a little seminary light version with these videos and eventually with online courses.
I really like, especially, I saw a few episodes where you clearly state that these are within the realm of orthodoxy, even though there are disagreements. So
Mm-hmm.
it's multi-denominational in approach for sure. And
Yeah.
uh, and so let me rewind a little bit. Let's go back to where did you grow up? Were you born in the U.S.?
Yes, I was born and raised in Los Angeles. So I'm a
Wow.
native Angelino, both
Okay.
my wife and I. So our families are still Los Angeles.
Okay.
Everybody is in Los Angeles. We're the only ones out here.
Okay. SoCal. Yeah, I grew up
Yep.
in Downey myself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was born I was born around Cerritos till I was
Okay.
4 and then moved to Rancho Palos Verdes. And so
Oh,
my family's lived there since I was 5 ever since.
sure.
They've never left. So
Sure. When did you know that you wanted to go into theological studies? How did that happen?
so a turning point in my life was in the 8th grade when a close friend of mine passed away from cancer and he was only 14 years old.
Oh, wow.
And so that was a turning point because, I think that at that point I grew up in the church. My dad was a Presbyterian elder. So, this was ingrained in me, but I started to ask, do I really believe this? And to my dad's credit, I talked to him and said, I don't know if I really believe this. I don't know if I want to go to church anymore because
Oh,
life is short. I want to make sure I'm doing this because I believe it. And to his credit, he didn't say, oh, you have to go to church, don't question it. He just said, well, before you make any decision,
hmm.
read the Bible, like read the gospel. I want you to actually read it for yourself. And yeah, if you, after reading through it and after really engaging with it, if you come away saying you don't believe this, you don't want to go to church, okay, that's fine. And so from the 8th grade on, throughout my high school years, I became really hungry of just learning the Bible. I was very hungry for the truth. My youth pastor pointed me to some books, apologetic books, and I just started engulfing a lot of things, mainly because it was almost like an existential crisis I went through when my friend passed away, and I just wanted to get answers.
Wow.
So yeah, that started it. And then when I went to Berkeley for college, I was a religious studies major,
Oh,
majoring in Christianity. And obviously, Berkeley's not a Christian school. It's not coming from a very Christian
right.
perspective. It was actually coming from a postmodern, deconstructive perspective.
Sure.
But that was another point where I really was challenged in my own views. I really had to understand opposing views. And I had a lot of Christian friends in my classes who dropped out or walked away from the faith because
Oh, wow.
they assumed everything the lecture was true. They're just saying, well, this is all mythological. Why am I believing in this? And so I really had a heart to try to help people to have a more of an academic response to some of these things that my religious studies professors will bring up in class. And so that I would say that's the beginning, but I never thought about ministry during that period, just to be clear. It was just, I had a hunger to know the truth, know theology, and also because I was challenged so much in college to understand the differing worldviews and to how to respond to those
This
things.
is intriguing. Starting from eighth grade is when you started to ask these very highfalutin questions because of mortality. You got
Yes.
in touch with death, and was it a very close friend that passed away?
Yeah, so his sister was actually best friends with my sister. So,
Oh,
we grew up with each other a little bit for a while. And then
wow.
he started coming out to my church probably a couple years before he passed. So, yeah, I mean, it was not just church, but school friend. It was a family friend. So, I mean, that was the first funeral I went to of anybody that was even close to my age, and so that was that made a
Wow.
big mark on me.
That's pretty young. Eighth grade.
Yes.
Yeah. So, as you were studying theology, did you find some of the questions that emerged from that incident? Like, as you were you be able to embrace faith as you were attacking it with your head knowledge? I mean, that's a it's a fair question, I think. Like, you're young, awfully young, and you want
Yeah.
to grasp at truth. And did you find that God was ministering to you during that time?
Yeah. So a couple books that really helped me was The Case for Faith and The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel.
Right.
And
Okay.
I really enjoyed those books because they were just interviews with different scholars. And
Oh,
for me, I never heard of like that there was an academic side to Christianity. Like I just knew it as the Sunday school stuff I grew up with.
right.
But I didn't know that there was actually like scholars and research and plausible theories to explain the resurrection, to or like archaeological evidence, or all of these things. And so that those books were kind of the springboard by which I started looking at, oh, who are these people he's interviewing, and what sources are they referring to? And that was just the rabbit trail. I kept going and just kept reading, try to get my hands on these primary sources, kept digging and then reading the Bible, understanding that there's a historical context to the Bible, which wasn't really emphasized to me growing up, like realizing the Jewish culture and the Jewish kind of what it came from. And so that a lot of that is where late high school, early college, so I really encountered a lot of that.
So you started getting into theology pretty early, since early high school.
Yes. And another thing is I have a lot of close friends from junior high and high school, and probably 90% of them were not Christians.
Yeah.
And so we will often have late night discussions,
Nice.
the debates where,
Sure.
they kind of challenged me a little bit, because they knew, you're not a dumb guy, Andrew. How can you believe this? And initially I would just get offended or just be like, oh, but
It would have been my short answer, I'm not a dumb guy, that's why I have faith.
I started to think about what they're asking. It's like, yeah, that's true. Like, what is the response? Like, do I even have a legitimate response to why I believe in this? And they're very sharp with their philosophical mindset. So it really forced me to do my own homework and research for myself to have responses to those things.
It seems like it's harder to prove atheism. It's harder to support it, intellectually. I mean, just seems harder for me anyway.
Yeah, there's definitely some inconsistencies in atheism that I don't think they realize, where they have faith too. So it's not we all have faith. We all have to have faith at some point, because there are things at some point we have to presuppose, because we weren't there. We don't know.
They hate it when we point that out.
Yeah, exactly. But I just said, well, you have more faith than me, because it makes a lot more sense to assume there is a God than to not to assume that there isn't a God, because there's all these other things I can't explain without God.
So, what is the course that you are teaching as an adjunct over there at Southwestern?
So it's pretty much all systematic theology courses and also hermeneutics.
Okay.
So it could be any topic. So the systematic theology courses in Southwestern, it's split up into 2 semesters, but it pretty much covers all the topics split up into 2 semesters. So
wow. Okay.
I have to be a generalist in the sense I got to know everything generally on that level, at least at the end, the seminary level. But then obviously for the PhD, I was more focused on eschatology. That's really my focus for my PhD work. But on a general level, I can teach probably at the MDiv level on multiple topics.
Okay. Wow. And are you enjoying it? Do you enjoy teaching in the seminary?
Yeah, I enjoy teaching the seminary. I actually really enjoy teaching in the church context, because my current position is that I'm an institute instructor so I work at a local church, but my focus is really building up a church institute, which is supposed to be kind of like a training center or seminary for lay people.
Yeah.
So I enjoy both contexts, but it's just a different demographic. But yeah, I love teaching seminary students, because obviously they're serious about it, they're hungry, they need to be equipped.
Yeah.
But I also like teaching lay people, because at least the lay people who take these courses, they're not taking it just for a Bible study. They actually want to get into some of these things, and a lot of these things they never heard, or it's the first time they're exposed to. So it's just neat to see kind of their eyes light up, or just things to make connections for them that they haven't seen before.
It must be very rewarding.
Yes. I mean, that's really why I feel like what keeps me going. Honestly, if it's not for, it's not going to be the great lifestyle or paychecks or whatever it is, but I think for me, that's what motivates me, is just to feel like I'm being useful for God's kingdom. And, even if no one responds, at the end of the day, I'm still called to be faithful, right? And so I shouldn't put too much based on people's response. But it does help when there's a positive response, or at least there's people who's growing in their knowledge and faith, and makes all those hours kind of worth it, in the sense like, okay, yes. There's something came out of it, if anything.
How big is Global Harvest Church? Is it a pretty big church?
I think it's like 400 adults and 200 kids. So around like 500-600. Yeah.
Would you say that it's a Korean American church, or would you say it's a multi-ethnic church?
So it started as an English ministry of a Korean Baptist church. So it's predominantly Korean Americans.
Okay.
It has some other Asian Americans, but it's a little different because before I was at Global Harvest, I've only been here for 4 months.
Okay.
I was the lead pastor for 7.5 years of a church plant here in the Dallas area.
Oh, wow.
And that was also an English ministry, but I wanted to really push it towards a multi-ethnic paradigm.
Yeah.
And so by the time, I stepped down, it was probably like 30-40% were non-Koreans. So that is really what I'm hoping in general to kind of push that vision on every Korean American church, is to think beyond their ethnicity and to really have a heart for multi-ethnic ministry.
When you wrote your book, it's coming out of a dissertation. Is it pretty much a dissertation, or did you
It's it's a revised version of my dissertation.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, okay. Because as I was going through, I'm going, I don't know if the general public would be able to grasp this content, because it seemed like it wasn't written for the layman, really.
No, it's probably more for
Peer review.
seminary
Yeah,
students.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you intend on maybe doing something like that in the future publication, writing a book that may be more accessible to lay people?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the thing is, I'm not a good writer and I really hate writing. It's so much easier for me to teach orally,
Okay,
which
okay.
is kind of the reason why I want to do a YouTube channel or make online courses,
Yeah,
because I feel like I could make it very accessible to a lay level.
yeah, okay.
My book is really just the product of all the years of PhD work kind of thing. But I guess if I start to do online courses and there's like, based on the feedback, if people really want to get deeper into a certain topic, I think I could definitely write a book at that level, lay
Yeah.
level. But I prefer not to write if I don't have to. That's not my forte.
Um, well, the thing is the topic that you're treating, it seems to me, appears to me, is timely. It's like right now,
Mhm.
there's a bunch of pastors. I'm doing a book study. I don't know if you've ever seen this book. You've heard of it, John
Oh,
Perkins.
I know John Perkins. Yeah, I haven't read that book though, but I know who he
Uh,
is.
and it's on racial reconciliation. And I
Mm.
thought that the theme was not too far. It's in the same ballpark of the
Mhm.
multi-ethnic kingdom, especially the eschatological vision. And
Yes.
he actually mentions that, talking about Revelation, and I thought that maybe like there is something going on. There is a movement right now with the
Mm.
whole racial divide, the tension that mounted since Trump, right?
Mm.
I thought maybe young scholars like yourself could maybe launch sort of this going at the heart of the gospel,
Yes.
because we don't want to be multi-ethnic. We don't want to press that issue, but if we're really following through with the gospel, we should be more diverse and more welcoming and more open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a friend named Raymond Chang, who's the president of Asian American Christian Collaborative. Um,
Okay.
that's really his heart, and it's um, it's really about racial reconciliation, not addressing racism not just on the black and white level, but
Right. Right.
obviously even from the Asian perspective. And so he gives a lot of seminars and talks on that. So and I think he's even written some things. But I agree, I think what he points out, and many other theologians are starting to point out, is that this isn't something this shouldn't be a political thing where we're looking at politically, but if you see
Right.
it theologically, it's understanding the gospel in a holistic way.
Right.
And my book was, the topic for my book, actually, I thought about it maybe 12 years ago. So it's before any of this stuff.
Mm.
But it was more my motivation for the dissertation topic was because I in eschatology deal a lot with about Israel, the future of Israel, and whether Israel will be in the kingdom or whether the church is a new Israel, that kind of thing. And
Right.
so I was writing the book from the perspective trying to preserving the future of national Israel. But then I start to realize when I look at scripture, there's so much that talks about the nations. Israel are there to bless the nations. It's not just about Israel, but and then so that's kind of the theme I just followed. It
Mm.
just happened now that once it got published, it's kind of, there's a lot more people interested in multi-ethnic,
Yeah.
multinational kind of perspectives. But if anything, I'm hoping that I can provide a theological framework
Yeah.
from where future people or maybe myself or somebody else can dig into it to draw out the practical implications. Because if it's, if this theological framework is true, if this is the biblical picture, then yeah, it has a lot to say about how we're doing church today, or it has a lot to say about the relational issues that we're finding amongst different ethnicities in America or even outside of America. So,
How long did your coursework take to do the PhD at the Southwestern?
let's see, it was 3 years of coursework, um, like a 1 year to do all my comprehensive exams,
Yeah,
and then
5 years.
so yeah, so 4 years for the dissertation part. But then I took a 1 year break during that 4 year.
Was that due to because your father was
Yeah, it's because
was he ill? What did he have a
yes,
health problem?
yeah. So he had tongue cancer.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so I mean, this was back in November of 2016. We found out.
Oh wow.
It was late stage by that point. So during that time, he was in Los Angeles. I was here.
Okay.
I would fly back every month. A lot of it, I was just helping out the logistics, for my parents, because, they're not too comfortable with English completely, especially speaking to doctors and insurance companies.
Are you
So
the only
I was,
child?
no, I have an older sister who's
Okay.
lives in Los Angeles,
Okay.
but in general, kind of the dynamics, they've always kind of leaned on me to just, take care of something. Like, so they're not the type to ask for help or be like, oh, you need a help. So I knew that because I have some friends who are doctors, and when I told them my dad has cancer, like, oh, you're gonna need to do a lot of this stuff, like, so because there's so much just work in terms of getting opinions or scheduling or treatment options, and you know they just said your mom's gonna get overwhelmed with this, gonna be a lot, and you don't want to stress your dad out, so as much as you can, you want to help out. So I was doing a lot of that, so I'll fly back and help with that. Obviously my mom was doing a lot of the day-to-day stuff, just taking care of him. But yeah, that whole process until he passed was probably like a little over a year.
Okay.
So I would, yeah, so I would fly back average at least once or twice a month. So it was pretty intensive. Thankfully my church was very gracious and letting me kind of be there during the weekdays and coming back on the weekends, or just being
So
very flexible.
this is all happening while you are leading the church plant.
Yes, this is all happening when I was full-time leading a church plant, have
Wow.
two really young boys, and
Wow.
trying to write my dissertation at the same time.
Okay.
And so when my advisor found out, he was just like, maybe I think you should just take a year off on the dissertation, just because I don't, he just knows I don't think you can get much done, and your mind's not going to be on that. So, I was great. I was disappointed because I just wanted to get it done, like I want to get done and then hurry up and move back to Los Angeles and be there for my dad. But looking in hindsight, that was actually the best thing that it could do, was to take that year break, because if I didn't take that break, I don't think I would have ever finished my dissertation or PhD. I think I probably would have just said, this is not worth it.
What did your parents do in the LA area? What kind of business or work did they do?
So my dad, he was an electrical engineer.
Oh,
He
okay.
worked at Hughes Aircraft that became Raytheon. And then eventually his department broke off from Raytheon, and they became, I think, subcontractors under Boeing. This is later on in college. So he's always been an electrical engineer.
Oh,
And
okay.
then my mom, she's a violin teacher, so
Oh,
she
wow.
taught music. So yeah, that's my background in terms of what they did. They both immigrated to the States back, I don't know, in the 70s, a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so both to Los Angeles directly. So
Oh.
they came to Los Angeles, got married here, and then have stayed ever since.
So it would appear there's a very poignant picture. I mean, I'm not stalking you on Facebook or anything like that, but just to gather some information, I looked in your Facebook and I saw that picture of your dad's. Where is he buried? Your father is in
At
Louisville,
At
Forest Lawn.
Forest Lawn, yeah, at the Hollywood one.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And uh, the date, the year is 2018, was it?
Yes,
2018,
2018,
and then you put you
January 15th. Yeah.
and you put the book there. Did you complete the dissertation after he passed away?
Yeah, so after, I took that year break.
Yeah.
That was when he was sick, got diagnosed, he was sick, and he passed away. And then
Oh.
so, after that, I honestly was just intending on like, oh, forget it, just dropping out,
Mm.
moving back to Los Angeles,
Oh.
just kind of being there for my mom because now she's a widow.
Sure.
But like a week before he passed away, so this was back, the last 2 weeks of his life, I was pretty much there every day.
Yeah.
Um, he kind of knew I was, even before he got sick, he knew how discouraged I was getting with the process because I
Yeah.
really wanted to finish fast and move back to Los Angeles. And so he made me promise. He said, you know what? I don't know, if I know you don't really want to finish it, you don't want to continue, but promise me that you'll do whatever you can to finish it, because he out of everyone in my life, he was the one who believed in me the most, but he was always very grateful, very content. He
Oh.
never placed like the super burdensome standard on me. He just said, yeah, do whatever you want, which was very rare, I think for Korean dads, or
Sure.
he didn't tell me what I had to do growing up or that you have to go to this college. He just said, do whatever God has called you to do. Um, do it to love people, and do your best. That was kind of his thing.
Yeah.
So, for him, he's always been the type though. He's always told me like, you can do more than you think. I think, he always says that I limit myself or I have, I think too small or I always undermine my own capabilities.
Right.
So he's like, you can do it. You can do it. He always would say that. And so, when I was like, I can't finish the dissertation, he's like, no, you can do it, but he kind of was implying, if not for you, do it for me, kind of thing. He was kind of saying like, finish it for me, because he really wanted me to finish it, and he really wanted me to, because his whole thing was there's multiple times during my journey in the PhD.
Yeah.
There was my first year right when I moved there, it was so hard financially. I was about to drop out.
Wow.
But providentially, I was literally 2 persons behind or 1 person behind the registrar. My dad just happened to call me at that time.
Mm.
And, and then I kind of just shared, like, I want to drop out. And he just told me, if God has called you there, don't leave until God calls you out. Like God will equip you and he'll get you through. Like, and financially, he just said, there will be help. There will be ways God will get you through. And, looking back, it's just a crazy, the stories of how I was able to, me and my wife were able to get through financial bills so hard. So he just said the same things like, you didn't come this far to quit,
Right.
just finish it.
Right.
So after he passed away, probably for the first 4 or 5 months, I wasn't doing it. I was like, and I realized now talking to a counselor, I started seeing a counselor. I was, in depression. So I was just
Right.
very unmotivated. But then there was something that kind of pushed me because I had a meeting so my dad passed away in January,
Yeah.
and I had a meeting with my advisor in June after that 1 year break. And even my advisor before the break said, we'll reassess it in June to see if you should even continue. So I kind of knew this was D-Day, this was judgment day. Like if I couldn't show enough progress, I might be out.
Wow.
So in May, this is literally 1 month of meeting. I had nothing to show for it. But then it was like so vivid. I could hear my dad's words of just like,
Wow.
get it done, And
Right.
my wife was like, what's going on? Like I was up all day, all night, just working. And
Mm.
give you context of who my advisor is. He's Craig Blazing, so he's a scholar in the eschatology field.
Oh wow.
His standards are so high that my first just prospectus, which is 12 pages,
Yeah.
it took me 18 months to get him to approve it. So
Oh
I did
wow.
14 drafts. Like that's how strict and hard he was. So I was thinking, okay, well, I'm not gonna pass this. I mean, his standards are so high.
Yeah.
Let me just try my best. And I wrote the first 3 chapters in 1 month. But I don't know if it was any good. I was just like, at least let me go out swinging for my dad. Like if I'm gonna be out, at least I could say I put it all in.
Yeah.
The morning of, I met Dr. Blazing. I actually emailed him the paper like the week before saying, here's the 3 chapters that I wrote. And then I said, I'll just look forward to your feedback. And then when I went there, I mean, I was ready, for him to be like, okay, I'm glad you tried, but this is not going to cut it. He came in and he was like, where has this been the past 2 years? Like, this is what I've been looking for.
Oh.
It's like, this is the best writing you've done, you know? And it's like, how come we, you know, this is what I can work with now. I was just, I mean, in that moment, I knew, okay, at that point, I have to finish this. Like God is giving me a chance because, no, if you just, I mean, it took me 18 months to get 12 pages approved, and I just submitted 3 chapters and he approved it within a week. I mean, that's a miracle to me. That's if you know him.
Yeah.
So yeah, after that, it took me another year to finish the rest of the dissertation, graduate. And then the year after that, I got it, you know, approved, a publisher, you know, when I started sending out my dissertation, a publisher actually wanted to publish it, which was amazing to me because I'm not a writer. And then the book came out a year later. And so I dedicate the book to my dad because, you know, I look back on that as it really was because of him. You know, it was his words. And I knew that I wouldn't have had that motivation if he didn't say that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when the book got published, when I visited California to visit my dad's grave, you know, I wanted, you know, to kind of just show him.
Yeah.
I was only able to do this because of you.
Yeah, I'm sure he sees it and he's proud of you, I'm sure. There's a poignant story behind the Theology 101 videos. I mean, I dig a little deeper, and there's something very poignant about the struggle that you had to go through. Thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways the blessing that came from my dad's passing is that I'm naturally a risk-averse person, but he was always the one that wanted me to take risks. Now I'm like a risk taker. I really don't care what people think anymore. You know, I think I had a lot of fear what people thought, and that goes with the Theology 101 YouTube videos. You know, because this was in my head for a couple of years. I was like, oh shit, you know, I think it'll be good for like people in Kazakhstan or whatever.
Yes.
After my dad passed, I was like, you know what? He always told me there's one life to live. What am I doing? You know, just do it. Just put yourself out there. Who cares if there's criticism? Who cares if you don't know what you're doing and you just got to figure it out, or you got to learn how to, you know, use a camera and lighting, and all these things are new to me. But yeah, I'm just glad that because of that, I almost felt like this freedom now of just doing whatever now. Like I'm not afraid of failing. And I think before, my dad was my security blanket in a lot of ways, and I didn't want to fail in that sense. So
yeah, you had to go through what every man has to go through once in his lifetime, which is facing the mortality of one of our own parents.
Yes.
And you've already gone through that, and now you have this boldness. I wanted to focus the latter part of this interview on the actual production and how you come about in your production. Like how often you have a lot of content, and this just came out because when I first saw you post things up, it was not too long ago, a few months ago, I think.
I started the week after my dad's anniversary death.
Okay.
So even Theology 101 is really driven kind of with my dad in mind. So if you notice the colors, it's blue and gold, which is the colors of UCLA Bruins, because my dad went to UCLA. He's a hardcore UCLA Bruins person. So like even the whole channel is like an homage to my father, just like my book. But yeah, so I started it in January, I think 25th. So it's only been, I don't know, 9 months, or not less than 9 months, so 8 months or so.
So I was actually going to ask you about the colors. You know, I didn't know that was for Bruins.
It's the Bruins.
That's good.
Yeah, even though I went to Berkeley, I'm a Bruin at heart just because I was raised going to UCLA games with my dad. So.
Oh wow. Did you and your dad ever have like theological talks? Did you ever was he kind of a buddy that way or no?
No, so it's funny. Like my dad never like sat down and did a Bible study with me or some theological talk. And the funny thing is that me and him, we disagree on secondary issues. Like I grew up in a Presbyterian charismatic church, which was what my dad was an elder of.
Okay.
And so when my seminary training came from a completely different perspective. So I knew that we don't see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. Like I was infant baptized, but now I'm a Baptist. So I don't agree with that anymore, even though I went through that. Yeah. But one thing though, is that the way I learned so much from my dad. I mean, I would say like of all the people, he's the godliest person, you know, more so than any other pastor I met. And it's because of his character. Like he really didn't have a hint of hypocrisy. Like he didn't put on an image for people at church. Like what you see is what you get. And I just saw how devoted he was. Every morning he prayed, went to prayer meetings. Wow. He was always reading his Bible. And so I think that's part of the reason why I have such a big heart for Christians to not misportray people they disagree with on secondary issues, because it really bothers me when like somebody speaks about, like, say, a complementarian friend I have, when he describes an egalitarian as like, oh, they're just not biblical, or they don't take the Bible seriously. That really bothers me, because I just think of people like my dad. It's like, no, this has nothing to do with who has more intellect or who reads the Bible more. It's just different conclusions you're coming to on interpretation. And there needs to be more charity, you know. And I don't like the straw man arguments that are really placed when people try to disagree. And I think that a lot of that's driven because I knew my dad so well and I respected him and loved him, even though we disagreed on some theological issues, but it never was an issue in our relationship.
That's wow. Now, you started this year, right? 2021?
Yes, January 2021. So 8 months into it now.
How often do you post? Do you post like weekly? Is that what you do?
Yeah, so I started once a week. So I told myself when I first started, like I would, you know, I do it at least once a week. But then around 8 weeks into it, I realized that if I was a little more efficient with my time, or if I batched my content, I could do it twice a week.
Wow.
And then so I started doing twice a week probably since then. And I plan on doing twice a week probably from here on out. And I mean, in general, I want to do around 100 videos a year. That's my plan. So,
wow. And
yeah.
Do you find that you will have that much material, that there will be that many issues and little questions that you would bring to light?
Yeah. So the way I'm making video topics is I'm literally just taking my lectures that I have from seminary, and then each lecture, I just take a snippet of some section and make it into a shorter video. And then so each lecture produces 3 to 4 video topics. And, you know, I have, I don't know, like 40 lectures or something, 50 lectures. So that's one way I'm getting kind of topic or ideas and materials. And I'm doing that strategically, because when I teach these courses in seminary or at the institute, or if I were going to reteach in person, I want to just have these videos ready, because it's easier than I don't have to keep reteaching the same thing over and over again. If someone wants to like, oh, well, what's the different views? I could be like, just watch the video. So part of it is, I know it's a lot of work on the front end, but it will save me a lot of time in the future when I reteach some of these courses, so that I don't have to spend so much time hashing out certain things that they can just watch the video on. And then so when the lecture time comes, I can just get deeper into it or go into another direction.
So technology allows us to become more efficient in the learning process as well.
Yes, this is an efficiency play and scalability play. Like I don't have time to lecture to every single person, you know, but this on YouTube I don't have to do anything. Once I put it up, it's there.
Are you in charge of the entire production, or do you have helpers that are that edit and put it together? You do it all?
I do it all from beginning to end. Yeah. The funny thing is that in high school and college, I wanted to be a director. I got into film editing in high school, and this is back when Adobe Premiere Pro first came out. So I was really into making movies or editing videos. And so a lot of my friends, they knew that, you know, and even in college, like I would just make videos for fun, or just, so I had a lot of years of just editing. And so I think, but I never, you know, obviously didn't go that route. I went into ministry. And I think one of the things I've been realizing is that everything I've gone through in life, God has used that in some way. Like I played the cello growing up because my mom was a violin teacher. So I played cello, and I think getting used to performing in front of people and that nerves actually helps me be a public speaker or a preacher. And I never would have thought video editing will ever be something I'll use in ministry, but here I am, you know, having to edit videos almost every week on YouTube. And I think because I had that background and I knew it, it cut the time down by a lot. So it wasn't such a difficult like ramp to put out 2 videos a week, where maybe if someone was learning how to edit as they go, it would be super difficult. They wouldn't have the time. But for me, it's like I've had years of doing this, where it's like, oh, you know, it's like riding a bicycle again. So that's why I'm able to do this all by myself. I mean, it doesn't generate any money or anything for me to pay someone to do it, which is one issue. But I also do enjoy editing. It's kind of relaxing for me. It's just like a little mindless, just editing it and putting it together. So
how long does an episode of like a 7 to 8 minute episode take in putting it together from the very beginning, like from you recording it? And then actually I imagine you probably have a script. Do you have a script that you go off of?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I probably the longest part is the script part.
Okay.
It's because I want to make sure that I don't put in anything that's redundant. And it's almost like preparing mini sermons for me. Like I'll put in a lot of time on the script part because I've realized that the more tight that script is, the easier everything else becomes. So thankfully, I already have a lot of research done from my lectures or sermons. So I don't have to do the research process, but just putting that together into like it's 3 pages of script that I write, probably an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
Just to make the script.
Yeah.
Recording it is only, maybe 10 minutes to 15 minutes. It's just usually for the most part is 1 take, 2 take, not many takes. But then editing, probably 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours. So altogether, it's probably like a 6-hour process per video. And so I'm usually spending probably around 15 hours a week outside of my full-time work, just producing and making these videos.
Wow, it's really interesting. I think I see a great future in this series. There's a lot of good content up online. I'm doing another study on the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis.
Oh, yes, I love that book.
Yeah, and I noticed that there's actually people putting up great content, little lectures on each letter and the whole aspect of it. So I see in your case in Theology 101 accessibility by, like you mentioned, I didn't know that you had mission fields in mind.
Yeah.
But I am sure a lot of people from other countries will be able to access these because they're so concise.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and then my goal is not just to stop at YouTube videos. I'm making the YouTube videos almost like a preview or snippet of
Okay.
so people can get, to see if people like the way I teach or whatever it is, right?
I think it's really good.
But I want to create a video library of online courses, ultimately.
Okay.
So whether it's through Teachable or Thinkific or something like that, like I want to take the actual full form into a video lecture form. Because, this is 6-7 minutes, but like 10 of those videos, maybe equal 3 lectures, but the lectures is a lot more that I didn't include. So it's kind of giving people a taste to realize, hey, if this topic interests you, down the line, here's a whole, video series, or here's a whole class you can take on Calvinism and Arminianism, or here's a whole class on dispensationalism, covenantalism, or the Trinity, things like that. But then it won't be so esoteric or academic like a seminary level. Like I'm still going to try to keep it engaging with illustrations or language as simple, but in a video format, similar to the YouTube channel, but just longer versions.
Right.
That's my goal, is to make a resource library of classes that are very cheap and affordable, like $100 for a class when the same class at Southwestern like 3,000, so I just want to make it really cheap. Yeah. So that anyone, you don't have to be a pastor, can just take it and be trained. Or if you are a pastor in third world countries or other places, it's not going to kill you financially to take a whole course on the Trinity or something like that.
And since you are a theology professor, I wanted to kind of pick your brain. Who are some of your theological heroes? Like, who do you look in when you look into the past, or maybe even the living theologians today? Who are some of your noteworthy mentions, like in the names, I guess?
I guess so a couple guys who are living would be like, or I guess they recently passed away, like Robert Saucy from Talbot Seminary. Saucy, Saucy. I really liked his books on like progressive dispensationalism, like on the charismatic gifts, open but cautious. I think reading his books were really helpful because it helps me see the spectrum and to realize it doesn't have to be this or this. There's actually like there's a kind of a middle ground in some of these things. My advisor, Craig Blazing, has been very formative, clearly, just because I spent probably the most time under him, his teachings, his writings. I'm trying to think in terms of past, I guess, dead guys.
You mentioned Kuyper in your book, Abraham Kuyper.
Yes. I mean, so I do appreciate, so I did come out of the Presbyterian Reform perspective, but I wouldn't call myself Calvinist completely, because it's the same way I guess I am politically. It's more on the issues. Depending on what issues, I have a certain stance. I'm not like faithful to one party completely.
Yeah.
So
You sound like you
my
become more
Calvinist friends would probably
Baptist.
say I'm not Calvinist enough, and my non-Calvinist friends would probably say I'm too Calvinist. So I guess it depends on your perspective. But yeah, Kuyper is
You're a
somebody I
Baptist.
read a lot. Actually, one person that what's that?
I was saying, you sound like you've become a full-fledged Baptist now. Your allegiance would be more
So
Baptist.
I'm Baptist in terms of maybe ecclesiology and eschatology. I mean, even eschatology. I'm more progressive dispensationalism,
Okay.
so that wouldn't really be a Baptist per se. In terms of
Okay.
ecclesiology, I will be more Baptist, but into soteriology wise, probably more Calvinistic than I'm definitely not Arminian, so I'll be more Calvinistic or provisionism. I know is another one that's in betweener. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm kind of a mixed bag. I think one thing is I have a very eclectic background. So I grew up Presbyterian. I went to Berkeley, obviously, very different. And then I went to a non-denominational church while in Berkeley. And then I went to seminary at Master Seminary with MacArthur. So that's a whole nother,
Oh, you went to masters.
yeah. So I went to Masters, which is a whole nother, which is pretty much Reformed dispensational Baptist, very conservative.
Yeah.
But then now I work in the Southern Baptist context. So, I've worked with a lot of different contexts, and I just try to take the best from each one. So there are things I agree with each thing, but I also probably disagree with. There isn't a perfect system I found. One of the persons that I really appreciated his work was um, like Von Rad and Eichrodt, Walter Eichrodt. So some of these guys I had to read just the way they describe salvation history or the concept of covenant. Those are some kind of pretty informative ones.
Cool.
But yeah, I don't really have like a hero per se. I mean, probably just my dad, but he wasn't a theologian, so I didn't really have any theological heroes just because um, I think I'm very aware that there's no perfect theological systems and there's always going to be faults with each one. So I just try to take the best from each theologian or theological system.
Um, we're approaching the end of our hour, and I
Okay.
wanted to take some time to, because I mean, okay, so I'm hearing your story, and there's more than meets the eye. I see Theology 101 here on YouTube channel, and there's a background story, and there's a immense struggle that you had to go through, where you
Mm-hmm.
felt like you were on the tip of just giving up, but then your dad was the voice that motivated you to finish. Is there something that you would want to say to somebody who might be going through a difficult time like that? And also for aspiring theology students, people that wanted to go deeper into advanced theology like yourself, because
Mm.
it's a pretty elite group of people we're talking about here. PhD is not an easy. You
So,
also mentioned in your book that your wife
yes.
was like basically shouldering the load while you were immersed in the
Yeah. I mean, she
everything.
was the financial provider, to be honest. Like ever since we were married, it was, because when I was a PhD student, the first couple of years, I was working on campus in the library, which was helpful because I could study. But I mean, it's like $9 an hour, right? So she was the one, she's always had to work full time. She never had an option not to work
And being a mom.
and be a mom. Yeah,
Oh my
exactly. And
goodness.
yeah, I mean, and she was always the one that wanted me to finish, and she was the type where she won't let me give up either.
Yeah, that's good.
um so yeah, I mean, honestly, if I was by myself, there's no way I can be a pastor, dad, and PhD. But it
Yes.
was because of my wife. Also, my parents were, from a distance, just trying to help me out here and there, especially my dad. So
Is
yeah,
there
it's hard. I mean, I guess my advice to people, so one thing I would say that I was never open to until my dad passed away
Mhm.
is I really think it's important for people to be aware of their mental health,
Mm.
um, and to go get professional help. As a pastor, it's easy to just be like, well, I know, what I'm supposed to do if I'm sad or
Mm.
going through trials, just pray more, read more. But there's more to it than that. I think there's getting professional help, whether it's a Christian counselor, Christian psychologist. I know in the Asian circle, especially Korean, like people don't like to talk about that. Like, oh,
Right,
like
right.
it seems weird but man, that really kind of saved me. Like going to a Christian counselor, that saved me big time because I was in really deep depression. I mean, to the point my wife was worried, like, are you like thinking, are you suicidal? Like, because I didn't want to do anything. Like, I didn't want to get out of bed.
Right.
And so she found me a counselor. Like, she's the one that found me. She's like, oh, this guy, he's a Christian. Um, he deals with pastors and depression, and meet with him. And man, he has really changed my life. I still meet with him every month, like even though I'm not in depression, but I just see the value big time of just talking to somebody every month about the stresses of ministry or how to handle, problem people, quote unquote, or how to, do all this stuff, and really helps to get objective trained outside Christian perspective in my mental health or like highlighting the way I'm being dysfunctional or the way I handle things that aren't healthy. So that would be my thing for pastors, especially, is invest time in your mental health. Get professional help as much as you can. Not just when things are bad, but just to almost maintain your life. But in terms of theology, I will say that if people want to get into theology, to be careful not to do it for the sake of just knowing things. The way I remember is when I first wanted to go to seminary, I didn't tell my mom because I knew she probably wouldn't like it. She made it very clear to me, she wanted me to be lawyer, doctor, successful or something, like that. She gave up a lot for me to be here. But my dad wasn't like that. So I told my dad privately. He was the only person I told about wanting to go to seminary. And so I asked him, what do you think? And so I thought he was going to say like, oh, don't do it. There's no money, or I thought he was going to talk about, oh, you got to go to the Presbyterian seminary or something, right? I thought he was going to say something like that. But he just said one thing, and that's always stuck with me. He said, Andrew, if you're going to go into ministry, make sure you do it because you love people. If you love God's people, God will take care of the rest, financially, whatever. But if you're not going to love God's people, then don't do it, right? He just told me it has to be about serving and loving people. And that's always stuck with me, even for like just being a theologian or, there's some classmates I see who are very sharp or whatever, but I can tell they're not really thinking about the person. And so they almost like bully people or just a very critical. Right. And I think for me, it's always going back to like, well, what's the whole point of all of this? It's to love your neighbor as yourself. It's to love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind, right? And so, yeah, this is mind, focusing your mind, but this can't be divorced from loving people. And if you're not using your knowledge to love people, serve people, help people, you're really wasting your time. So I would say, if you want to get into theology, do it for the right reasons. Because at the end of the day, in the kingdom, there's not going to be any titles. I'm not going to be Dr. Andrew Kim in the kingdom. Like, who cares about the PhD? It's really just a tool to serve people. And then I guess on a practical level, if you really want to know if you want to get into theology, I would just say you got to read a lot, not just from, hearsay or just from read primary sources. So before you dismiss a Calvinist or Arminian, actually read what they write, right? Or before you dismiss Lutherans or Catholics, read what they actually write. And you'll be surprised. You might agree a lot more than you disagree. And this will help, I guess, keep things in balance for you so you don't become too kind of myopic in your perspective, or to be careful not to surround yourself in an echo chamber where you're only talking to people you see eye to eye with theologically. I think that could be dangerous because it will then become tribal. And I think goes against the first point of, well, that's not loving people if you become a tribal theologian.
So theology should serve the people, and it could be an instrument to equip them and to love them.
Yes.
That's not in the calling. It might be better to just forego and do something different. Yeah. It's really good to have met you, and I think that what you touched on just right now, because I didn't know. I'm just discovering a lot of things just now about the value you esteem that you have for Christian counseling and regular maintenance for pastors.
Yeah.
And hearing your background, I'm sure that there's grief that you're still working with now. You're still working through now, and there's that whole probably a background in your own personal theology, in your experience, in your faith. So next
Yeah.
time, if we get a chance, I would love to touch more on that.
Yeah, I really think I think the grief and depression I went through has really shaped how I view scripture and God. If anything, it brought about a deeper intimacy with God, and um, even theology. Like now, theology is practical, literally, because it's like holding on to the words of God
Yeah.
for life. And so, yeah, I'm actually glad I went through the things I went through. I could say that now, in hindsight. Obviously, in the moment, I would have traded anything to have my dad be alive, but I think God's wisdom has really shown in that he knew the right time for my dad to move on for his sake and also for my sake, just for where I need to be, what in this journey that he has for me.
Nowadays, are you finding yourself having a little more free time to exercise? Yeah, have a
Oh,
little more free time?
yes.
Oh, good.
I am once I finish my dissertation and publish my book, man,
Freedom.
it's so much time. I'm like, wow, is this what it's like to be a regular person? Like, yep,
Oh,
this
wow.
you have so much free time. So yeah, I've been going back, working out again, and
That's good.
I've had friends again, socializing, like just going out on a night to watch a sports game. I mean, that's, I just started watching sports again recently, and it's like,
Okay.
and then, so thankfully the pandemic, I mean, being a Dodger and Lakers fan, it was like the best. Like right when I get back into
That's
sports, my two teams win. So
yeah.
it was, yeah, I feel a lot more well-rounded and healthier. And that also helps with grief and depression. It's just being, not so focused on one thing, but to be more well-rounded. And so,
Right.
yeah, PhD, man, it wasn't good for my mental health or physical health or whatever. So I wouldn't recommend it just for everyone.
Yeah.
I'm glad I went through it, but I will never do it again. So
I've heard PhD stand for permanent head damage.
yes, that is true. I think I have a permanent fog in my brain forever now because of this.
For those of you who are tuning in, Theology 101, Theology Made Simple YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. I think that this will be very useful for your edification and knowledge. And a lot of the topics that are coming up, very, very common questions asked in the church to pastors. So instead of pestering your pastors with these questions,
Yeah,
go
watch
to
the
this
video.
channel and watch. Go see this. Go see
Yeah,
this.
exactly.
Thank you so much for being my guest for
Yes,
our show. And
thank you for having me.
I hope to see more creative output coming from that corner in